because I'm Mike Madrid, and I'm the author of Supergirls, which is a history of comic book superheroines. A lot of people ask me how I got interested in this subject. And for me, it pretty much started when I was young with Supergirl. The first comic book that I remember having was Superman 195 from 1967. And for a 6-year-old, there was a lot on this cover to intrigue you. Superman is succumbing to green kryptonite gas. There's a tiny city in a bottle. There's a dog with a cape flying around. But for me, the only thing that I really noticed on this cover when I looked at it was Supergirl, who was in the background. Even though she was imprisoned in this glass tube, she seemed completely noble and composed, and I was fascinated by her. Inside, you could see her flying. She could look through the walls with her X-ray vision. She busted out of the ground and beat some guy up. And in the 60s, I'd never seen anything like this before, and I was, like I said, I was fascinated by her. She was like, here she is, with her Streaky the Super Cat and her pet Comet the Super Horse, who she had a slightly questionable relationship with that I talk about in the book. But she was like my sort of like fantasy, like older sister, babysitter, and I wanted to meet more. I wanted to find out about more of these interesting women. When I was a kid, comics were 12 cents. So my mom would give me a quarter and say that I could buy 2. So I would spend a lot of time on that spinner rack going through to find the 2 that I should get for my quarter. And the ones that I always wound up picking were the ones that had these women in it. I didn't buy the war comics or the cowboy comics or things like that. I wound up buying the ones that had these interesting women. And as I grew older, my comic book collection grew, and I encountered more of these women, and I thought they were like my movie stars. They were powerful, and they were brave, and they were beautiful. But even in this fantasy world that they lived in, it still seemed like our world, because I never understood why they weren't allowed to be as powerful as the men in the comic books. As I got older and I learned more about the history of comics, I read a lot of books, and I wanted to always find out more about these female superheroes, but the books never really talked about them. They would talk about Superman and Batman. They would maybe mention Wonder Woman, but they didn't really talk about the women that much. So as I got older and kind of learned about these characters, I thought, someday I wanted to possibly write a book about them, because I thought they had really interesting stories. And as I was putting this book together, I realized they had a lot of interesting stories, but when you look at the whole thing, it winds up, in a sense, for a lot of the women in the room, it winds up being your stories as well. It's like, it winds up being the story of women for the last 60 years, in terms of how their characters have changed, and sort of the challenges they've encountered over the years. So that's how we got to be. That's how I'm here. Most people think the comic book started with Superman when he first appeared in 1938. But that's not actually the case. Comic books were around since the mid-30s. But it wasn't until Superman first appeared that comic books got their sort of unique identity with the superhero. Batman appeared in 1939, and after them, there was this just huge wave of superheroes that flooded the market. Coming out of the Depression, this was a very American concept of sort of the average guy who steps up and sort of assumes these powers to help his fellow man. A lot of these characters, these men have been forgotten over the years, but what has been forgotten is that before any of these men, there was actually a woman who was one of the first stars of comics. And her name was Sheena, the Queen of the Jungle. She first appeared in 1937, a year before Superman. And she represented all of the qualities that, in literature, that were attributed to men. Bravery, she was fearless, she was a strong ruler, but it was in the body of the ultimate woman. Sheena was was a lot like the other women that would follow in her footsteps, in the sense that she was beautiful, she was sexy, but she was never a damsel in distress. She never had to be rescued. She was always in charge. On the right, we see her. She's rescuing her mate, Bob. She was always the one who was saving him. Unfortunately, that would not be the case over the years with other heroines that followed after her. So when superheroes first started appearing, we got a lot of these characters women started coming onto the scene as well. A lot of them were these sort of beautiful debutantes that decided to become crime fighters to have a life of adventure. Women like Phantom Lady and Lady Luck, but there were some of the unusual characters as well. There was the Red Tornado, who was an average working class mom who would dress up and put a stew pot over her head and fight crime in her neighborhood. And then there was Madame Fatal, who actually was a man who would dress up like an old lady and fight crime. When comics were only about 3 years, the superhero comics were only about 3 years old when World War II broke out in 1941. And the comics became a huge propaganda machine. You had all these characters like Captain America and Major Victory and Minuteman who flooded the market to fight the Axis powers. Now, World War II was a fight that women could join as well, either by working in the war plants or joining the armed forces. So in comic books, we had this core of these patriotic heroines that flooded the pages as well. Characters like the Black Angel, who was this ruthless fighter pilot. There were actually 2 different Miss Americas, and characters like Liberty Bell, the All-American Girl. And you see, we see her. She's beating up some fascist here, and she's saying, "Drop that little man." These girls really were. They didn't mess around. They had a war to win, and they were tough. Of course, the most famous woman to come out of World War II was Wonder Woman. She appeared just as World War II was breaking out, and she was the Amazon princess who was sent to man's world to defeat the Axis powers and to defend women's rights. She wasn't here just to fight the Nazis. She was also here to save mankind from itself, and to teach man the ways of peace and love, and to abandon the ways of violence. The other thing that she was created for was to be a role model for girls, for girl readers. And she would always share little bits of wisdom with her girl readers. Here we see her boyfriend Steve is once more trying to get her to quit being a superhero and marry her. And she's saying, "If I married you, Steve, I'd have to pretend I'm weaker than you to make you happy, and that no woman should do." These were great comics, and I'd say if any of you who have daughters, you should have them read these Wonder Woman comics from the 40s. And Wonder Woman in the 40s was a member of the Justice Society, which was the first team of superheroes. And you see down here it says, Justice Society fights for a united America. But the Justice Society itself wasn't necessarily united, because even though Wonder Woman was as strong or stronger than any of the men, she was only allowed to be the team's secretary. So there would always be a scene where the men would rush off into battle, and she would say, "Good luck, boys, and I wish I could be going with you." So the comics in the 40s were filled with these women heroes. Here we go. But after the war, there was a big drop-off in superhero comics. They lost popularity, and they were played. That's fine. Yeah, they were. Other comic genres became popular, like romance comics. Romance comics were considered to be more appropriate reading material for young girls because they always ended with marriage. So a couple would go on a date, and by the end of the story, they would be engaged. This was considered to be more appropriate for girls than reading about women running off and having adventures. The other thing that we get in the 50s is morality. There was a lot of pressure on comics that they were bad for They caused juvenile delinquency. There were Senate hearings. There were books written about what a bad influence they were. So the comic companies started the Comics Code, which provided a set of rules by which comics had to abide and really clean things up. So after the war and going into the 50s, we see Wonder Woman spending less time fighting fascists and dictators, and really spending more time with her boyfriend Steve, trying to keep him happy. The other thing that happened in the 50s was there was a lot of there were certain allegations that she was a lesbian, that she was a threatening image to women, to boys. I'm sorry. So they really had to clean up her image and make her more appealing to boys and a better influence for girls. But Wonder Woman wasn't the only hero that was under scrutiny. There were certain allegations that Batman and Robin had a questionable relationship as well. So by the mid-50s, to kind of clean things up, we had the introduction of Batwoman, who was meant to be Batman's girlfriend. Batwoman was a very nice lady who idolized Batman and dressed up like him so she could be like him. She carried a handbag in which she carried things like lipstick and powder and hairnets that she would use to fight criminals with. And she was very well intentioned, but he spent so much time telling her how incompetent she was that there was really not much of a romance that ever got off the ground. There were a lot of stories in the 40s and 50s where Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, gets superpowers. And you can see in this one, we see Lois can do everything Superman can do. But in these cases, when this happened, generally she didn't use her powers for good. She used her powers to try to show Superman that she was worthy to marry him. And here we see Lois gets superpowers, and she's built a giant griddle in the desert, and she is making a super pancake breakfast for Superman to impress him as to why she should be his super wife. When a superwoman was a kind of a threatening image. So when Superman finally did get a partner by the late 50s, she was not an adult woman, but she was his 15-year-old cousin, a supergirl. The feeling was that a supergirl, a teenager, would be a better role model for young female readers than an adult woman who might actually have more of an opinion and ideas of her own. So Supergirl wound up being sort of the ideal daughter, well-mannered, obedient, and always Superman's helper, but never his competition. As we go into the 60s, we think of this as always being the beginning of the modern world in terms of politics and civil rights and culture and fashion. And there was a big shift in comic books as well at this time. Marvel Comics began their so-called revolution in the 60s, and they introduced a lot of superheroes that had real-life problems and flaws. Characters like the Hulk and Iron Man, and their most popular creation, Spider-Man. Now the thing about Marvel Comics is they all of their big stars were men, despite the fact that their stories did really revolutionize the industry and make them more adult. All their stars were men. The women in Marvel Comics were always secondary. They were characters like Invisible Girl, the Wasp, and Marvel Girl were always the girlfriends or proteges of more successful, usually older male heroes. And the way they were written was that they were more interested in getting married than fighting crime. Here's a typical exchange. Invisible Girl and Mr. Fantastic have just gotten married, and she's complaining that she wants a normal life. And she's saying, I want to be involved with supermarkets instead of supervillains. She says, I'm sick of living in a ridiculous costume. I'm a woman. I want feminine dresses, foolish hairdos. And as usual, Mr. Fantastic calms her down by telling her that she can go on a shopping spree. And finishes by saying, when she is quiet, he says, wives should be kissed and not heard.
What year is this?
66. The women in Marvel Comics were usually members of teams, and they were always presented as the weaker members of the teams. But in contrast, there were a number of heroines that came out of the 60s that showed that there was some progress. The Doom Patrol was one of my favorite teams, and their female member, Elastigirl, was actually the strongest member of the team. Here we see her, she's turned into a giant, and she's wrestling with a dinosaur in her white gloves and her high heels. There was a new Batgirl who starred in the 60s, who actually, unlike her predecessor, Batwoman, didn't take a lot of crap from Batman. And even the wholesome heroines of the Legion of Superheroes would sometimes turn the table on their male teammates when they got tired of being pushed around. But sadly, during the 60s, the heroine who wasn't doing that well was Wonder Woman. She, all through the 50s and 60s, her story had been watered down so much that she was really a shadow of what she had been in the 40s. So, faced with cancellation, her publisher did something drastic. In 1968, they took away her powers, they took away her bracelets and her lasso and everything, and they made her sort of a hip, karate-chopping secret agent who roamed the world in search of adventure, much like Emma Peel on the Avengers TV show. A lot of people weren't happy with this because they felt like she wasn't a Wonder Woman anymore. One of the people that wasn't happy with this was Gloria Steinem. By 1972, she had launched Ms. Magazine, and she put Wonder Woman on the cover, saying, there was a story about how Wonder Woman had been a feminist icon for young girls of her generation. So the following year, Wonder Woman was back in her costume with her powers. Unfortunately, she may not have been, her stories may not have been the feminist stories that Steinem would have liked to see. But the 70s was the decade where Wonder Woman reclaimed her title as the queen of superheroines by making it to TV finally and becoming iconic. During the 70s, we see a lot of comics became more realistic in the sense they tried to deal with real life problems like drug addiction and poverty. Here we see Lois Lane getting into a machine in which she emerges as a black woman, so that she can investigate. She can do an investigative report on the ghettos of Metropolis. So naturally, women's lib would become a subject that would enter comics as well. This is in a 1970 story here. There's a character named the Valkyrie who has gotten the heroines of the Marvel comics to reclaim their rights. Here she's saying, "All right, girls, that finishes off these male chauvinist pigs. They've beaten up all the male heroes of the Avengers. From now on, it's the Valkyrie and her Lady Liberators." Usually, these stories showed they were written to show that women's lib was sort of something that shouldn't really be messed with, and at the end, these women usually wound up deciding that the status quo should be left as is. But as time went on, true feminist heroines were introduced. Characters like Power Girl. Here she's telling, she was one of the more strident heroines of the 70s. Here she's basically telling Superman to shove it. She's saying, don't give me any orders either. I'm on my own now. And when he says, "Can't you listen to my advice?" she says, "Not anymore. I can't and I won't." This is how feminists were usually written in the 70s, as being a little heavy-handed. The big problem that these feminist heroines faced was probably bad writing. Once a lot of these liberated characters were introduced, most of the publishers didn't really know what to do with them. This is Ms. Marvel over here, who was created to be Marvel Comics' version of Wonder Woman. She wound up being the first unwed mother of the superhero world, with tragic consequences, which I would talk about in the book. There was also a question of with all these powerful women that were being created, their sexuality was also played up quite a bit. This was also the era of the sexual revolution. So in order to make these characters a little bit more appealing and less threatening to male readers, their sexuality was really exaggerated in most cases. If it seems as though this is that this kind of imagery is strange to see in a children's comic, you should just remember what the kind of thing we were seeing on TV at the time. There was another question with the liberated heroine, which was whether it was actually the right thing to do to try to become as strong as a man. Here we see the tough as nails warrior, Big Barda, and she has been rescued by her partner, Mr. Miracle, and she's humiliated by the fact that she showed weakness. And she says, "I was afraid for us, I, a warrior," to which he adds, "You're better than that, you're a woman." So there was this whole question that maybe women were giving something up by trying to act like men. There was another question of power with women. There was a strange thing with, we had characters that were more powerful than anything we'd seen in comics before. Characters like Phoenix from the X-Men, who literally could do anything. She was as powerful as a god. But in the end, she found that power to be too intoxicating, and it consumed her, and she wound up becoming this evil sort of angel of death. So comics have raised this. There was a double standard here in the sense that you had very powerful men that never encountered this problem, but there was a question as to whether women could handle the same amount of power. The story of the Phoenix brings up a whole kind of cultural shift by the late 70s. Late 70s, we have the whole idea of the good girl gone bad, like Sandy in Grease, sort of going over to her dark side. There's a cultural shift with the emergence of punk rock in the sense that culture was going into a darker direction. By the early 80s, when MTV hit the airwaves, America's audience was really introduced to a new kind of pop star that was much different than what they'd seen before. Harder, more angular, more aggressive, a little intimidating. And this archetype entered into the comic book world as well. This is Storm from the X-Men. This is who Halle Berry played in the movies. This is how she looked in the 70s when she first appeared. She was the first major black superheroine. By the early 80s, she had toughened up her act to deal with harder times. Here she is. She has a mohawk. She has a studded collar. She has a lot of leather. This is the direction that women were going in. Comics were really written as in the 80s were written as facing a very bleak world with drugs and AIDS, the threat of nuclear war. These female heroes reacted by toughening up their acts, cutting their hair, putting on spikes and leather, and weaponing themselves up and getting ready to face tough times. Now, one of the quintessential heroines to emerge from the 80s was the She-Hulk. She-Hulk was, like her cousin the Hulk, she was a normal woman who could turn into a big 7-foot, powerful woman. But unlike him, she maintained her intelligence when she made that shift. So she was kind of the classic 80s woman. She was a powerful 7-foot green lawyer by day and a crime-fighting hard body by night. There were a couple of different things about She-Hulk. She actually knew that she was in a comic book. So she would often talk to the readers and she knew that like I said, she knew she was in a comic book, and because of that, she knew she had to present a sexual image in order to sell comics to male readers. Here we see her doing a parody of the Demi Moore Vanity Fair cover. And here we see her in a bikini, and she's saying, this doesn't actually happen in the inside, but it makes for a good cover. She-Hulk also was, like another icon of the 80s, She-Hulk manipulated her image, her sexual image, to further her career. She also was sexual. She went out with men. She had a sex life. and she was unapologetic about it. But she found, like Madonna, she found that there was a double standard in the comic book world, and her reputation as a superheroine suffered because she had sex. Going into the 90s, we entered a new era of artifice with the era of the supermodels, where the media was promoting these sort of genetically perfect women as celebrities and raising the standard of beauty to a level that normal women could never attain. The other thing we had in the 90s was a blurring of the line between adult entertainment and mainstream entertainment, with cinematic classics like Showgirls and celebrities like Pamela Anderson, who was sort of centerfold / actress. So this whole trend entered the comic book world with the bad girls. The bad girls literally flooded the market in the 90s, and they were it was so the comic book world was flooded with these thong-clad, big-breasted, ultra-violent women who didn't really do much to raise credibility of female characters. Unfortunately, they became very popular, and even established heroines like the Invisible Woman from the Fantastic Four and Wonder Woman had to sex up their look and put on more skimpy outfits to compete. Besides the sex, the other thing that was really amped up in the 90s was violence. And face it, comic book superheroines and superheroes are crime fighters. So they're fighting, so they're always going to be shown in dangerous situations. The difference with women is it's often taken to a different level that becomes somewhat sexualized and has a disturbing voyeuristic quality about it. So these women are not just shown in danger, they're actually shown in situations that is kind of humiliating them, which is disturbing. No discussion of superheroines would be complete without touching on their costumes. Superhero costumes are often criticized because of the inequity. Here's the Justice League. Most of the men are fully dressed, and the women are wearing swimsuits. Like fashion in the real world, comic book fashion is often criticized for being too impractical. Here are two extremes. Here's the blonde Phantom, who was a character in the 1940s, who was a secretary, took her glasses off, and went out at night in an evening gown and high heels. Here we see her; she's climbing on a rafter to save her boss in a long evening gown. On the other extreme, we have the White Queen from the X-Men, who is wearing something that you couldn't necessarily do a whole lot in. But to put this into everyday terms that people can understand, everyone remembers when Jennifer Lopez wore this Versace dress to the Grammys in 2000, and the world was abuzz about this. How could she move in this? How could she walk down the aisle? Any of this. This is Starfire from the Teen Titans, who has to wear much the same kind of costume, but has to fight, fly through space, or stop a bus full of school kids going off a cliff, or fight a 50-foot monster. So in comparison, J-Lo walking down the red carpet with Diddy and getting to her seat isn't that big of a feat. Marvel Comics is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year, and ironically, they are using this image, and you can see 40 years after their comic book revolution, they still don't have any female stars in their roster. Captain America, Spider-Man, the Hulk, Iron Man, Wolverine, and Thor. But after 40 years, they still haven't created anyone comparable to Superman or Supergirl, or Wonder Woman. But there are a lot of female superheroes that are around that are still carrying the torch and fighting the good fight. Characters like Catwoman, Birds of Prey, who is an all-female team of heroes, and one of my favorites, who is still embodying that original spirit of comic book crime fighters, Manhunter. Manhunter is she is as tough as they come, and she is a career woman. She's a lawyer. She's a single mom, and she either gets these guys in the courtroom, or if she can't do that, she'll hunt them down the street. But she is like one of the original crime fighters. So enough about me. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. With the popularity of She-Hulk, how come she did not make it as like one of like the top Marvel heroines? Because she was just so popular.
I know, but I think unfortunately the bottom line with these things is that it all comes down to what sells, and she doesn't sell as much. She doesn't sell as many books as Wolverine or the Hulk or Iron Man.
Oh, okay.
That's probably part of the problem with most of these characters it's mostly these female characters that the reason they're not as well known is because they don't sell as well.
Yeah, but it looked like she was always like on the verge of becoming like an icon for a Marvel. It's like, oh, this is
Right.
it. They found it.
Yeah. Yes.
Mike, do you get the sense that the readers of these comic books featuring women were women, or were they guys? Were they young boys?
It's mixed. I think that in the 50s and the 60s, like Wonder Woman and Supergirl were really more focused on, they were targeted to girl readers. But I think that as they dropped off in the 60s and like moving into the 70s, there was probably a mix.
So where's Wonder Woman now? Is she alive in the comics?
She's alive. They've changed her quite a bit over the years, but she's alive, and her comic's actually quite good right now because it's finally being written by a woman.
Who are some of the authors and artists that you feel like are the most feminist writing today?
Gail Simone, who she wrote Birds of Prey, and she went on to write Wonder Woman, and she's writing Wonder Woman right now, and quite good. She's also doing Secret Six. Mark Andreyko, who does Manhunter. I think not superhero comics, but the Hernandez brothers do Love and Rockets. It's great. I think the new Batwoman series is good. And I think the new Ms. Marvel has been good, by Brian Reed. That's been good. It would be nice if there were more women writing these, I think, because I think you get an entirely different perspective when women write these comics. But unfortunately, I think more women do the independent kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'm going to move over here and do sign some books.
Great, thank you.